which are not part of the key. And I've managed to work it so that these sound, I tried to emulate what the Beatles did, which was to have all these weird chords. But if the melody is obvious enough, you don't notice the weird chords beneath. The melody just guides you from note to note. But I mention all this not to say that I'm fancy or anything, but that I'll have written this song and I'll play it, and Victor will join in without having seen the music. He knows where it's going. It's that native to him that he can hear these strange chord progressions.
So what do you think, kind of like...
Sorry, I got off topic there.
No, that this actually is totally on topic, because my next question would be like, what about, is there such a thing as total amusicality? Is there, like, if you know, I'm sure that Victor wouldn't has a perfect pitch ear and all that.
He doesn't actually.
No, he doesn't?
No.
Oh.
But that's a whole separate thing.
Okay, but if, you know, to be able to kind of like, you know, tell from the what you hear, what it is, and you know, so if you don't get exposed to it at all, would you become some like totally amusical, or this, you know, maybe this wasn't a very well formulated question, but maybe.
Yeah, well, as we all surely have read a lot about amusic people. So they are people, and we don't know the prevalence, but it's, some say that it's 1 to 4% of the population. But people who really cannot differentiate between notes or melodies or tunes or tones, or they might, the famous examples are that I've heard that Theodore Roosevelt said that I know only 2 songs. The other one is Yankee Doodle. The other one is not. So there are people who are totally unable to produce a melody or differentiate, and for them the sound or music typically sounds like noise or something very unpleasant. But it's because of it has something to do on, you know, probably more specifically that it's in the brain, so it doesn't. I have never heard about that. Somebody wouldn't be exposed to music, so that would affect something. Do you have any? No.
Well, so there are different kinds of amusia. There's people who are born without an appreciation for music for whatever reason. And then there are people who acquire it through a stroke or a tumor or some trauma, and they become acquired amusia versus congenital amusia. And of the acquired kind, we've seen every combination you can imagine. People who suddenly can't hear rhythm, but they can still hear melody and instruments and chords. Other people who can no longer tell their rhythm's fine, but they can't hear the difference between pitches. Or suddenly, after a brain injury, what used to sound like music just sounds like noise, like a blender or you know, a machine noise. There are people who have never been exposed to music. So, for example, in devout Muslim traditions, music is forbidden, and chanting is allowed, which is a flavor of music, I suppose. But music in the way we think of it is forbidden, and there are other cultures that forbid it. But what we don't know is whether they can understand music even though they haven't been exposed to it. There just haven't been, to my knowledge, any studies of them.
It's difficult to get them to come to the study.
Right, they'd have to renounce their religion, and then, yeah.
But you're a singing teacher, so and you guys play instruments, so it's also, I suppose, a motor skill, like producing a sound. And
definitely it is.
Kind of like to be able to produce a sound that you think, you know, you have this idea of how it should sound, and then to make it sound like that, I suppose there's also this component that you need to have this kind of like.
Yeah, and we all probably know people who are really musical but are not good singers.
Bob Dylan.
Yeah. For one, yeah. So I'm sort of like opposed to this traditional thing that music schools may have their incoming exams so that one has to sing there, because it might be really difficult for some people who wouldn't have any problems with musicality itself otherwise.
Is that something that you can practice?
Yes.
You can.
In the same way that you practice instruments.
Bob Dylan's probably had a lot of practice though.
Yeah.
Well, so Dylan's an interesting case. He doesn't have a singer's voice, but he does hit the pitches. I've done the acoustic analysis. It sounds like he's not, because he uses expressive intonation, and he'll throw away things. So it must be some kind of way out of here, you know. And you know, he's so. It sounds like he doesn't know the note, but he does. And if you know, if you track it, he's hitting the pitches, but the quality of his voice, it's not clean, you know, like Frank Sinatra. Springsteen has a kind of a rough sound, but we like that in rock and roll. But they're not conventional singers.
I think
They're storytellers.
Right. Vesa.
I think this amusia example brought to my mind that there are also these interesting cases that people are perfectly able to perceive music, but they just don't enjoy it, that there is something that they call musical anhedonia. So people who are musical but just do not care about music, even though they are perfectly able to experience pleasure in other avenues of life. And these have been, also the brains have been studied so that we see that there is some kind of atypical response in the kind of deep reward system and their interaction with their auditory cortices when they hear music. And
You have a brand new study about this.
Not this specifically, but of course we do lots of studies on pleasure in music, but we don't have any anhedonics yet in our studies.
How would you call an anhedonic person to come to the study that and listen to music?
Yeah, that's
We'll
good.
torture you.
Usually they also get some other rewards, so money, for example.
Chocolate
Helps.
cake.
Yeah.
So we talked about how people develop this musicality. So, but musical development also has a connection to other aspects of development, and you've studied the cognitive development of children and its connection with music. Could you tell a little about that, Tanja?
Yes, well, I've studied small children, preschool age children, and they were in my PhD a few years back. I had this group of 75 children. Part of them participated in music play school, part of them in dance lessons, and then we had this passive control group, and we followed them for 2 years. And we found out that those who had participated in music play school, their language skills were improved more during these 2 years than the skills of children in the other groups. And this is not the only study that there are quite a lot of studies that show that participating in musical activities regularly tend to enhance language development and maybe phoneme processing and vocabulary, which is sort of, it's not like surprising in a sense that these functions in the brain overlap, because they are speech and music are acoustic modality, or we process them in partly similar places or networks in the brain. So when you learn to differentiate sounds and produce them in the musical context, you probably your hearing in that sense gets better also when it comes to language. And then there are some studies also showing that executive functions, which mean it's an umbrella term referring to several skills like ability to inhibit distraction and cognitive flexibility and working memory. And it seems that participating in regular music activities might also support the development of these skills during the years when children are developing fast anyway.
Like waiting for your turn or being quiet for a little while.
And if you play an instrument and play in an orchestra, if you're big enough to do that, then there is change in the I've lost word, tahtila, like the tempo. Not tempo, but the like if you count to 3, or then you change the count to 4, or change the key
The
where
rhythm.
you play, and you need to be able to like change the way you think in a while, and it's quite demanding task.
Changing the cognitive set. Yeah. The other interesting thing, just to extend what you said, is that older adults who learn an instrument, or who have been playing an instrument and learn new things on it, or learn a new instrument, build up cognitive reserve. So the idea is that you're building up new neural pathways when you engage with music. And that cognitive reserve can help mask the symptoms of Alzheimer's for years. And we saw this with Tony Bennett and with Glenn Campbell, 2 American musicians who were still performing at a very high level while they had Alzheimer's. And it's equivalent to, say, a marathon runner who can run, I don't know it in kilometers, but it's 26 miles is a marathon. And
42 kilometers.
How much?
42.
Oh, thank you. So, sorry, I speak the old antiquated system. But even if they can run 42 kilometers competitively on a bad day with COVID and a sprained ankle, they can probably still run 5 kilometers faster than you or me. They've got this physical reserve. And the idea of cognitive reserve, or brain reserve, is that you build up these skills which add on new layers of neural pathways that are neuroprotective. They help protect your brain from eventual decline. And that's an important factor too. And what we've seen is that musicians tend to have longer health spans than non-musicians. So we're all familiar with the term lifespan, which is the amount of years that you get on the planet. Health span is the proportion of that time that you are healthy. And the normal course of progression is that you're born and you get older and you become an adult, and you're pretty much healthy through your whole life if you're lucky. And then at some point you get really sick and you're miserable for the last few years of your life, and you're sitting in a chair and you can't move and you're drooling on yourself, and that's not the healthy part of your life. So we distinguish health span from lifespan, but the health span of musicians seems to be longer. Even casual musicians, amateur musicians.
Yeah, so it's like being an active person somehow. If you practice music, somehow it keeps you active. Maybe what would be
I think
the
book
mechanism?
publishers live longer too.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. Vesa, did you have an insight on this?
No, not really. I agree with everything that was just said. Maybe there are these very interesting, let's say, amazing studies showing that even music listening after a stroke or in old age can help in the recovery of certain cognitive functions like working memory. Nilla knows better. Maybe she can come up, but yeah.
Well, in language. So you were talking about your finding that music and language use some of the same pathways. There's overlap. And there are also, of course, language-dedicated and music-dedicated circuits, which is the basis for a therapy called melodic intonation therapy. And this has been used successfully on people who lost the ability to speak, say after a stroke or some trauma to the head. In the US, we had a Congresswoman, Gabrielle Giffords, who was shot, and she lost the ability to speak. And she regained the ability to speak through melodic intonation therapy, which is just a fancy name for teaching people to sing rather than speak. And the idea there is that because the pathways are overlapping and yet also there are distinct pathways, and because music activates so many parts of the brain, even if you lose your speech centers, there are these redundant pathways that allow you to still sing. So you might be taught to sing, "I need a glass of water," or "show me to the bathroom." And once you learn to sing these basic things, it scaffolds your brain into being able to say them and not sing them all the time.
Wouldn't it be nicer if we actually all communicated like that more often?
Okay, so
I will try that with you. From now and forever.
So I think we'll move to the last topic. I'm not sure if I'm able to communicate this very clearly, but the idea is that we've talked about the emotions the music evokes, and then we have this kind of thing that it's connected to the cognition. And there is, I think, some sort of consensus that our cognition is really, in many ways, inseparable from our emotions. Like the decisions we make are connected to, our emotions. And I was reading this new book by Robert Sapolsky called Determined, and there was this crazy thing. I don't know if you can tell me anything about this, but there was this story about this crazy, for me, crazy study that there's this brain area called dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's in the forehead somewhere here, and it's considered to be the rational decider in this frontal cortex area. And it has to do with decision making and self-control, like you were talking about. So, like, there seems to be this kind of like, and activating this area with transcranial magnetic stimulation makes people, for example, this was one of the Sapolsky's studies he cited, makes people more utilitarian when they make this tram problem, answer to the tram problem, and they are more willing to, if you stimulate this area, they are more willing to sacrifice one life to save many. But also, this is the funny part. He refers to this study where this kind of activation was used to manipulate the projection from this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to the dopaminergic pathways and in the striatum. And I quote, "This changed the test subject's music taste, enhancing the subjective appreciation of a piece of music and the physiological response to it, as well as boosting the monetary value the subjects assigned to the music." What do you think of this? What's going on? I'll pass. You'll pass.
Well, yeah, there is such a study showing this, and I guess the idea is that this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is connected to the striatum, which is one of these central hubs of the reward circuits. And indeed, they showed that you cannot, in humans, without doing something really interfering, of course, stimulate this region directly, the deep reward circuits. But because this region in the prefrontal cortex is stimulatable with TMS, you can actually indirectly through this region stimulate these regions that supposedly kind of encode the value of stimuli. And these guys were able to show that by doing this indirect stimulation of these reward circuits, they were able to get people to enjoy certain pieces of music more than without this stimulation or this kind of control stimulation of other regions.
So basically, poking from outside this brain area was kind of like making, what's the correct phrasing, but the idea that, created this situation there that, it was more rewarding than what they were hearing.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah. So it sounds a bit scary, but this was the result that they got.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I think Vesa and I, I'm reading your body language. I think Vesa and I feel some skepticism about that study in that in science, the unit of currency is not the single experiment. It's the meta-analysis. Somebody's done the experiment 20 or 30 or 50 times with different people in different laboratories in different ways, and then you look to see a pattern of results across all those studies. A single study doesn't really mean much. And I know Robert Sapolsky, and he and I have talked about that particular study. There was an old notion 20 years ago that we would say, well, this thing happens in that part of the brain. So there was a temptation, because of the neuroimaging tools are relatively new, to say, oh, that part of the brain makes you more utilitarian. It makes you want to preserve the good of the many at the expense of the one. And that part of the brain makes you open to enjoying music more, or open to enjoying new music. And it doesn't really work that way. These are massively distributed circuits, spatially distributed throughout the brain. And yes, you can stimulate a part of the circuit, but what happens then is anybody's guess. All other kinds of things are affected. Your brain is not just a bag of chemicals. If one chemical level changes, there are 99 other neurochemicals that are going to change in response, most likely to either maintain homeostasis or react to some change. We only have, you may correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think we only have tools to measure about 7 of the 100 neurochemicals that are in the brain, to measure them directly. And so there's a whole bunch that we don't really know what's going on with them. We make some inferences, but I would say it's intriguing that the area that was involved in utilitarianism and I guess you might call it
Musical taste, maybe?
Yeah, it's intriguing that there's a connection there, but I wouldn't read too much into it.
Yeah, and of course I confess that I took this thing totally out of context where he was using it. So but kind of like I've just been reading the book, and then this
Are
came
you publishing? Do you publish?
Yeah,
his
it's
books?
going to be published in Finnish this autumn.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's already in Finnish, but not yet out as a book. Yeah.
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 It is in Finnish. It's not published in Finnish.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You translated it. Terrific.
Yep. Right. But there's still, just the thing that we've been talking about so many things like this rational decision making and this music, this connection, somehow it felt like this might be interesting. So we don't have much time left. Actually, we're almost spent our time here. Maybe we could have a couple of questions from the audience. If somebody has, we can take maybe 2 or 3. Wait. Let's use the microphone so everybody hears, and also our listeners over the internet. Just a second. This is Juha Pietiläinen talking. He's translated this Daniel's book.
No, I haven't.
Not he's published it, but this one, Field Guide to Lies, that's his translation. Yeah.
Has anyone studied the effect of music on people feeling, having a group feeling, like when you start to sing, you become more willing to make a group connection. And after you make a group connection, you follow with the music and do the crazy things all sorts of groups might do. Does music have such a socializing effect?
like a start, but there are studies like about the short-term effects of music on social, like a connection or coherence. And one of my favorite studies is one by Laura Cirelli, who they had these 1-year-old babies that were bounced either in synchrony with the experimenter or in asynchrony with them. And right after this bouncing, there was this situation where the experimenter like dropped something and sort of like asked for help from this 1-year-old toddler. And those children who had bounced in the same in synchrony with the experimenter helped more spontaneously the experimenter and faster than those who were in asynchrony. And this is quite common observation in studies with children and in adults, that if we synchronize ourselves to the others, we tend to help the others more or cooperate better afterwards.
And another one, in written language, we've developed from the written language has developed from the cave paintings, figures of swine and deer and so forth, to these figured signs of hieroglyphs, and we've advanced to making a mark for a sound. That's the alphabet. We can translate language sounds into written text. Do you think that music will develop from its modern sort of complicated form into this simpler form of an alphabet, where you can, with like in Finnish you have 28 letters, you could have music with just say maybe 20 or 40 musical letters? Do you think it's possible, or is this just a crazy idea? Nobody wants to answer.
A musical alphabet.
Yes.
Well, we have something like that in biblical Hebrew. So the Old Testament was originally orally transmitted before it was ever written down, and it was sung. And the way that it was preserved, it's believed by theologians and anthropologists, is that the entire text of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, from Genesis through Deuteronomy, were sung in Hebrew to a very particular melody, and there was mutually reinforcing cues of accent and rhymes and meter, so that only certain words would fit the melody and the rhythm. And when it was written, eventually there were these marks called cantillation marks, which indicate how the melody and the rhythm are supposed to be done. So there is that, and I believe that the Sumerians had a similar method of keeping track of music. The Greeks had a way of writing music. It's different than the music notation we have now, because the system we have now separates pitch and rhythm in a way that the older system did not. But how would I wouldn't really call our musical notation system an alphabet in the sense that you are.
It's rather complicated compared to an alphabet.
Yeah, it's complicated compared to an alphabet, and it's not. Yeah, I think the older. I don't know why modern methods of notating music aren't an alphabet, but I think conceivably they could be.
An interesting thing.
I mean, if I could say, there is sort of an alphabet among session players, recording session players, called the Nashville system. And I don't know it, but all the Nashville players know it, and it's a way of representing chords and harmony and melody in a numeric system, as well as voicings. Not rhythm, but it is a kind of an alphabet.
An interesting aside, you were talking about the Hebrew Bible. The national epic in Finland, the Kalevala, was recorded in the same way. It was sung before, and in the 1820s and 30s, Elias Lönnrot wrote it down in letters with an alphabet. And it has a rhythm to it and so forth.
Okay, any more questions? So okay, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you, Tanja, Vesa, Daniel, for being here. And Daniel will be signing his book over there for a few minutes after this, and so please pick up his book, and remember to check out his new book. Let me check it out again.
Music as medicine.
Music as medicine. Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you.